Hello and welcome back. Today we're taking a look at one of the deep mysteries of .NET. Please don't turn off, please don't turn it off. I need this. They have my family. We had some lovely feedback from the last deep dive, but some of our less techie viewers said that while they enjoyed the ride, they didn't really know what was going on. So I thought I'd get us all caught up with a quick potted history. The laws of physics were decided at the moment of the Big Bang. Hydrogen particles flew out in all directions in accordance with those new laws, and there's nothing any of us could have done about it. They formed the stars and the planets over billions of years, the only way they possibly could, and completely outside of our control. We didn't even exist then. And over an inconceivable amount of time, the planet we now know as Earth cooled enough to develop life that could thrive in its environment. That initial life evolved continually over a mind-blowing number of generations, until what we now know as humans made their way to the top of the delicious food chain. Eventually, we were all born without our consent, and now we exist, tiny creatures strapped into a rally car in the vast nothingness, clutching the downy hair of the beast that made us, with no influence over its laws, yet bound by them, imbued with an illusion of free will that can never be sated, and cursed with that knowledge as long as we live. So I hope that's us all caught up. This is the deep dive. An incredibly valid question found its way to me recently about the long-dreaded ConfigureAwait malarkey. I say long-dreaded and malarkey because if you're sitting here thinking you know all about async continuation, well, that's great for you, but I assure you that most developers have at best a scant knowledge of .NET's equivalent of the offside rule. And much like the offside rule, it's become embarrassing to be heard asking about it. So to that end, let's everything you were too afraid to ask ConfigureAwait. Also, while we're here, can anyone explain the offside rule to me? This is not a joke. So at this point, you'll surely be wondering what any of those words meant. So let's take a little trip to Analogy Town, your favourite. Let's imagine in our tiny little brains that we own a clothing store and we're having our shop front redecorated. The shop front in this example is the user's mobile phone screen, and the decorators are the creatives in the workshop, essentially the app's code to make things that display to the user. The workshop's nearby, but it's across the street. In order to get things on the screen, the decorators have to make the items and then put them in the shop window. As a certain copyrighted meerkat might say, that seems uncomplicated to me. Now it stands to reason that while the decorators are assembling the frontage, putting heads back on the mannequins, and it's not my business to ask why they were detached. If they also have to take each item across the road, there will be noticeable pauses in the shop window being updated. You may get where I'm going with this. In .NET land, ConfigureAwait set to false frees up these metaphorical decorators to continue their work. The false part meaning, no, you don't have to be the same ones who put the stuff in the window. They can get on with making the next part of the frontage. In technical parlance, and brace yourselves, we're saying that continue on captured context is false. Yes, I know it's painful. And that, sadly for you, is the basics. You're now qualified for the next section. I'm so sorry. Story time. So there's this old classic tale about gorillas in a zoo. One gorilla touches the fence and it gets electrocuted, and it finds that this is not a thing it should do. It tells the other gorillas not to touch the fence, and they tell their offspring not to touch the fence, and they tell theirs, etc. It's a whole big no fence touching orama. Eventually, through the passage of time, and when humanity has evolved morally to make it illegal to electrocute gorillas that you put there, it comes to be that no living gorilla knows why you don't touch the fence, only that you absolutely do not touch the fence. How is this relevant? Well, in the olden days of .NET, back when crude oil was a lad, you had to specify ConfigureAwait with every async call, otherwise the default was true, and the previous gorillas said that would be bad. They said some lunatic thing about shop fronts and decorators as well, whatever that was. The problem is, we did a far better job of hammering it into people's skulls than we did of telling anyone why. So we end up with a situation where it's added everywhere, regardless of need, and only about 2.5% of anyone can tell you why. Don't touch the fence. This led to the affectionately named CAF becoming a household name among .NET developers. At the time, it made sense, given that the majority of applications for .NET were desktop applications. Having ConfigureAwait default to true meant it was a lot harder to mess up a UI-based application, but it put a lot of onus on the writers of any other code. And then, Microsoft changed it. They removed the whole context issue from a version called .NET Core onwards. But, well, we can't start touching the fence now, can we? That thing was scary. I think it just looked at me funny. So, when do we actually need to use it? Let's sort this out. The general rule is that if your API services code is staying in your API service, in other words, all of its library projects are consumed by it alone, then you don't need ConfigureAwait. Apply fire. If you need it because you super know what you're doing, obviously that's cool. Also cool is if it's likely to be referenced in an app with a UI layer at any point. I've gone so far as to make this handy flowchart, so I'm sure that'll be the end of that. You can manifest this flowchart at any time by searing it into your mind now and then holding your breath for 15 seconds while thinking of shop fronts. It's not weird, you're weird. I've said all of this in the context of user interfaces and API services, but there are other reasons that you might want to put a leash on your await and make it come back in the way it went out, even in .NET 9 and above. I'll give 2 examples here, and then I'm going to ragdoll out of this video like a marionette off a moving train. COM components are an incredibly old thing that we used to talk to the inner workings of early Windows. Ugh. They couldn't really handle more than one message at a time, bless the little socks. Configuring your awaits to true will make sure we don't confuse them. Aww. If you ever need code that chats to ancient or custom hardware, you'll need custom drivers, and it's likely that they won't have much bandwidth available to them. Speaking very carefully and slowly to that gear will be best, so you'll want to configure your await to true. And here we find ourselves at the end of another deep dive. Please join me next time when I'll attempt to contort another analogy to live forever in your soul. I've been Andrew Cameron, and technically I'm still Andrew Cameron, so apologies for that. Bye!